Today, ladies and gentlemen, I will be starting with Arena. This game has something that many modern games lack, and that is ambition. Sadly, that is about all that it has going for it. The controls are arcane and hassle to work with. Combat is, well, combat after a fashion. Thankfully, the world is quite large, but the controls make exploring it a bit of a pain. However, for its time, this game gives the player an insane amount of choice in both classes and playstyle. For its time, I will stress that I do not think Arena is bad, but it is very much tied up by the technology of the era. The story is simple, but not bad. It's something that Ted Peterson still remembers getting panned for, but I don't think he should take it too harshly. The game's a good introduction to the world of Elder Scrolls. And for all the game's flaws, it was a massive success for the time, and though Arena may have slipped and fallen over in a few places, its sequel sprinted. Daggerfall is, in my opinion, one of the best open-world RPGs of all time. The world was massive, using procedural generation to make a game world truly breathtaking in scope, with several different biomes and habitats, but sadly it was held up by the technology of its time, leading to a sense of sameness. In that, if you'd seen one town, you had sort of seen them all. The controls are surprisingly modern for a game of this era, especially if you take the time to get your key bindings squared away. Combat is actually fun. The magic system is easy enough to understand, even for an ID10D for like myself. It's a long way from perfect, naturally, but it is definitely an improvement over what came before. The story is what happens when someone is trying to overcompensate for criticism, which Ted Peterson, the original writer, even copped to on an interview with Camelworks. I think that it is a good enough story, and it serves the world of Elder Scrolls very well. And apparently a lot of other people did too, because this game sold very well for its time. But sadly, not all was well, for the next game was very much a departure from the old design philosophy. Morrowind is a game that succumbs to design philosophy that sadly remains in many studios to this very day. If something does not work, don't try to fix it, cut it entirely instead. For everything that Morrowind added, it took three things away. The world is a minuscule fraction of the size of Daggerfall. While it added new skills and even new weapon types, it removed others entirely, whereas in Daggerfall you could learn the languages of certain creatures and by doing so pacify them. Now you can't, and other skills were simplified. Rather than having Equity and Streetwise, you have Speechcraft. The story is entirely set in stone. Your ending is already written for you. If you want to play a lore-accurate Nerevarine, then you must play a Dark Elf, you must go kill the living gods of the Tribunal, and you must go sail off into the sunset and towards Akavir, never to be heard from again. This design philosophy is where things really start to go streamlined, and this is also where a lot of the old people who worked on this franchise just left. Oblivion is a game that carved out a lot of what made this franchise special. The skills were even more streamlined. Now, rather than having the short and long blade skill, you had the blade skill, allowing you to wield everything from a dagger to a claymore. The spear skill and weapon type was removed entirely. So was the medium armor. Sadly, the game held to the world design of Morrowind, once again being a teensy tiny fraction of the size of Daggerfall, but supposedly being more dense. Supposedly. The combat is the usual smack it till it dies that Bethesda has become known for, and the magic is greatly simplified. The enchanting is anemic. Even Grand Soul gems empty in just a few hits when using an enchanted weapon. And though enchanted armor does not need to be recharged, you will have to repair it regularly, which can be a bit of a pain as the weapons and armor degrade pretty quickly compared to previous titles. It feels this way to me. Exploration is the same as in Morrowind, as the map is once again, as stated before, a fraction of the size of Daggerfall, and while the handcrafted approach should have, at least in theory, added a variety to the dungeons and towns, many of them feel very much cookie-cutter, and have the same sense of sameness that people complained about in Daggerfall, which used procedural generation, rather than handcrafting. The story suffers from the same predetermination that Morrowind suffered from. You will become Sheogorath and will become the Lord of the Shivering Isles. That is canonized, meaning that ultimately your choices do not matter as your ending is already written. Sadly, the fifth entry of the Elder Scrolls would not return to its roots either. Skyrim is a game that I have a love-hate relationship with, as it is the game that got me into the Elder Scrolls. But where Oblivion was streamlined, Skyrim took that philosophy and cranked it to 11. The world was larger than Oblivion, which was nice, but it was still a far cry from the Goliath game world of Daggerfall. The biggest change is the complete removal of classes. This is perhaps the worst design decision in the entire history of the mainline Elder Scrolls. This decision removes much of the replayability that previous titles had, as you can master every single skill in one playthrough. Yes, it's difficult, but you can do it. True, playing a Wood Elf might give you a slight bonus to archery, but training up that skill to that point is really easy, making it just as viable to play as an Orcish Ranger as a Wood Elf one. And yes, the racial powers are still there, but you will rarely use them because you have the shouts that do the same thing, but better. And this brings me to the magic, which has been cut off at the knees due to the complete removal of spellcrafting, and the inclusion of shouts that do much the same thing as the spells, but usually weaker. True, Unrelenting Force is awesome, and you cannot pry the smile off my face with a crowbar when I shout a Thalmor agent off the side of a cliff, but overall, they feel rather lackluster. The skills have been even further slimmed down, to the point that rather than having a blunt and blade skill, you have the one-handed and two-handed skill, which is a design decision that annoys me on so many levels, no pun intended. I will reiterate, Bethesda, wielding a warhammer is not the same as wielding a broadsword. Wielding a mace is not the same as wielding a dagger either. Stop trying to appeal to the people that eat paint chips. Elder Scrolls is above all an RPG series, but you seem to love to cut out all the parts that make it an RPG. The quests feel like the dev team got a third of the way through and went out to get a pack of cigarettes. Anyway, this game suffers from power creep. You could save the world no less than 4 times in one playthrough, which after the second time gets a little stale. And while some of the side quests are competently written, the guild quest lines let you become the head of every guild in the Skyrim in one playthrough, which removes much of the incentive to go back and replay the game. All the guild quests feel like they're missing something, because they are. If you go digging into the game data files, you will find a metaphorical mountain of cut content, which would lead you to believe that this game was under time crunch. But Bethesda released Skyrim 6 years after Oblivion. Now, I know that Bethesda has other franchises besides Elder Scrolls, but this game was rough at launch. And being the series that pulled this company from irrelevancy to being a AAA developer, I think they should have tried to treat it with a little bit more respect. And this brings me to one of the best and worst things about this game, and that is the mods. The mods fix a lot of problems with this game, but that is not a good thing in my opinion, as this allows Bethesda to continue releasing broken games, and just letting the modders fix it, which is a problem across both Elder Scrolls and Fallout series. I personally think that mods should exist to add new content to the game, not to fix problems that the developers were too lazy to fix. This was a cursory retrospective of the mainline Elder Scrolls. I didn't go into Elder Scrolls Online because I could complain about that game for hours. And I'm not going to go into Redguard or Battlespire either, as both of those games are just not worth your time. Don't bother. So, I hope you liked it. I'm sorry if it sounded like me being just angry at Bethesda. I'm not. I love this series, but it does have a lot of problems that need addressing. And I apologize for this video being late, but I had some technical issues. My headset got broken, so I had to fix that. Anyway, this is Pete from The Radical Nerd, signing off.